Testing. Hello. What's wrong? You were in the ow. Stop. Ow. That's my hand. You can't eat that. Okay, welcome back to the channel. My name is Steven and I am a barista. That's it. I wanted to make this video to compare the Timemore Sculptor 078 and the Timemore Sculptor 064. Except not really. I didn't have the money for that. So what we're actually doing is comparing the Timemore Sculptor 078, which I do have, to the Fellow Ode with the Turbo Burrs of the Sculptor 064 installed inside. What are you? Come here. Come here. This is Vivi, newest addition to our family. And she's a little bundle of energy. I love you too. Okay, go play over there. Where was I? Some backstory. At the beginning of the year, I had finished making a review video on the Timemore Sculptor 078. It's a filter-only coffee grinder. And to clarify, it is one of a family of, I guess now, 5 grinders. The other members of that family being the 064, which is like the little brother or little sister version, the 064S, 078S, and then the 078 SSP. The S stands for stepless, but the burrs inside of each model are different. The S models have flat burrs and can grind for espresso, whereas the regular models don't. They're filter only. And this is because the burrs inside of the regular models are ghost burrs. Well, specifically, they're Timemore's Turbo Burrs, which are a hybrid of flat and ghost burrs. You will note that it has these 2 layers, an internal flat-like layer and then an external ghost-like layer with these pyramid-like teeth. The 078 burrs, the Turbo Burrs, they have such a distinct flavor profile from ordinary flat burrs. Coffee's ground on this grinder will yield cups that are described as juicy, thick, soupy, intense, really sweet. And back when I made the video, I honestly wasn't the biggest fan of this unique flavor profile. And I would say this is still more or less true, though the grinder has since grown on me. And I stated this in my review, and some people commented on the video and they said, hey, the burrs of the grinder simply might not be aligned. Great point. So I set about trying to align this grinder to prove my point to myself. And that's when I ran into a pretty big problem, and that is the ghost teeth. There's the Sharpie method where you use the burrs themselves, you zero them, and when they touch, then you can tell that there are parts that are, I guess, off-center or uneven. And so then you would add shims under the burr to try and re-even or re-center that burr, and then you do that on one side and then you do it on the other. And the problem is that the highest part, the outermost part of those burrs where the 2 burrs come into contact, that's at those pyramid teeth, at those very fine points. And so it's basically impossible to calibrate the grinder with those burrs. And really it would have been better if I started with the 078S, those have flat burrs, then calibrated the grinder, and then taken those out, installed the Turbo Burrs, and then done the review. So then I said, okay, well, let me just buy the flat burrs and I'll do just that. And I said to myself, I'll buy the flat burrs if I can get the Turbo Burrs out of the grinder. But I couldn't. I couldn't get the burrs out of the 078 because the burrs are installed with 2 machine screws, and the heads are regular Phillips heads, and they're really soft, and one of them ended up stripping. And the screws are so soft that upon my initial opening of the chamber, I was taking photos, and you could see that there was already evidence of damage to the screws when they were installed, like before I'd even touched them. So I left the burrs inside of the 078, but I bought these M4 machine screws off of Amazon, which have like a little Allen key head over your typical screw head, and I replaced the burr screws on my Ode, which take the same screws, because the Phillips heads can strip very easily. And one thing I have on my to-do list is to buy a thread tapper to try and extract that stripped screw out of the 078 and then replace those as well. If you're changing your burrs frequently, heavily recommend these M4 machine screws, and I'll link them in the description if you want to replace the screws in your grinders as well. So while I was looking at those 078 flats on Timemore's website, I noticed the 064 turbos, and that gave me an idea. I was curious, and I know I'm not the only one, how different are the turbo burrs on the 064 to the 078? Like, how close do they come? Do they pack as much of a punch? Can you save yourself hundreds of dollars getting the 064 over the 078 and get a similar experience? And then on top of that, if you already have a 64 millimeter platform grinder like the Ode or something in the DF series, could you just buy the 064 turbo burrs and slap those in that grinder, because they're only $100, and save yourself even more money? Hello again, BB. Okay, so I guess you're just in the video right now. You're just in it, and I'm gonna keep talking. So I bought those burrs for $100. I put them in the Ode, and I have spent the past 6 months or so brewing coffee on them, comparing them to the 078. Now that they're seasoned properly, I think it's time to share my results. And to make things really official, I wanted to do a final comparison, test, and tasting with different types of coffee. Specifically, 1, something clean and bright, a daily driver. 2, something more chocolatey, nutty, malty, something that pairs well with milk. And then 3, something more dynamic, funky, weird, processed in a weird way, like an anaerobic or a co-fermentation. So I went shopping for coffee for my next roaster, and I narrowed it down to 3 different roasters that I was interested in, and that was Verve, Presta, and Methodical. And I ended up going with Methodical because they had a sample box with basically exactly those 3 styles of coffee. And what I ended up getting was, for the clean coffee, a Rwanda wash process, notes of apricot, honeysuckle, and citrus. For the nuttier coffee that pairs well with milk, a Costa Rica, notes of almond, ginger snap, and plum, also wash process. And then finally, for the funky coffee, a Colombian. The process is noted as being natural and experimental. The website did not specify what that meant for experimental, but notes of stone fruit, berries, and chocolate. I got those in. They all looked great. I got to brewing them side by side with the 2 different grinders and tasting and comparing the results. And I did a pretty basic recipe of 15 grams in, 250 grams out, aimed to finish in the 3-minute range. So for my findings, for the clean coffee, the Rwanda, both grinders did well in showcasing these coffees. The apricot did come through on the 064 burrs, but it definitely shines through more on the 078. The 078 does really well with fruit style notes and definitely accentuates sweetness. The honeysuckle, I didn't really get as much with the 064. I barely even got it with the 078, but it was there. There was perhaps like a floral background. And then the citrus, you do get that on the 064. The cups were balanced. They had good body, good acidity. But with 078, there was definitely more body, more sweetness, more of the citrus came through. But yeah, definitely way more of the apricot. For the nuttier coffee, definitely got more of the ginger snap with the 078. Ginger, that's something that could be juiced. And the 078 has juicier results, and so that was there. They both did really well with the almond. The plum came through more with the 078, but I didn't really get so much plum as I will say, like kind of a basic stone fruit. Yeah, the 064 with this one had more bitterness, I will say. And the 078 was kind of not gentler, but I would say even more rounded than the 064, but the 064 did do really well. And then finally, this was the weird one, the natural process. I thought because the main notes were stone fruit and berries that the 078 would do better with this coffee, but I honestly enjoyed this a lot more on the 064. And I think the reason is coffees that are funky, that are wild and bouncy, the 064 does a really good job of taking that like eccentricity that you can get with these coffees and kind of filtering it into something that's like very refined and very palatable. Not only that, but because there was a note of chocolate, the 064 Burrs in comparison to the 078, they add a touch of bitterness at the end, and I feel like the bitterness that I get out of those Burrs, it always has like a cereal or a grain quality that pairs really well with chocolate. The natural and experimental process, way better on the 064 in my opinion. The 078, it kind of really turns up the volume on everything. With funkier coffees, it can kind of just like be way too much. A little just too loud. And side note, these single origins from Methodical, some of the best coffee I've had to drink all year. I thought that these were really good. Thank you to the people at Methodical. So to summarize, if you like fruit, if you like fruitier notes, coffees with a lot of sweetness, body, brightness, and intensity, I would go with the 078. I would commit to that grinder. If you like dynamic, wild, funky, bouncy coffees, and/or you like chocolate, vanilla, spice, nuttiness, more baking qualities, then I would steer you towards the 064 instead, and also simply just to the Ode Gen 2 Burrs. And then finally, number 3, if you like florals, if you like more subtle fruit flavors, clarity and separation of flavor, things being more tea-like, skip the turbo and go style of Burrs and go for SSP Burrs. And that could be the 078 SSP, or that could just be, you know, any grinder with SSP Burrs. There is no one-size-fits-all Burr set, in my opinion. I think there are good general-purpose Burrs, but I do think that every Burr set is, you know, good at certain things and kind of just okay at others. Ultimately, I don't know, and this might just be because I put them in the Ode Gen 2, but I don't know that the 064 Turbo Burrs are that much different than the Fellow Ode Gen 2 Burrs. I think you'll definitely end up with a rounder taste with, you know, slightly more body, but not by much. You know, you'll even get slightly more bitterness. I don't think the 064 Burrs come close enough to the 078s. I don't think you get the same experience. And if I think if you look at pictures of the Burrs side by side and you compare them, the differences become pretty clear. With the 064, you know, you look at the Burrs, they're mostly flat. And then on the very outer edge, you have like this small shelf of ghost teeth to finish. The 078, you know, it's got essentially like the whole interior is an 064 size or diameter burr, a flat burr. And then you have 2 large sets of finishing ghost teeth, and they're vertical ones and there's horizontal ones. And I think that impacts the resulting grind greatly. Now, don't get me wrong, I still think that the Timemore Sculptor 064 is a great grinder for the money. It is built Ford tough, is a great workflow, has the fines catch, it looks beautiful, but if you're counting your pennies, I think the Ode Gen 2 might just be the better deal. There you have it. Thank you so much for listening to me talk about grinders for however long this video ended up being. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out via a comment or a DM. I'll do my best to get back to you. And if you have either of these grinders, if you have both, if you've put Turbo 64 Burrs in your Ode, you know, please let me know your thoughts, add to the conversation, add a perspective. Yeah. All right, guys, I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.